Emily moved quickly between tables, balancing a tray of drinks with practiced ease. The restaurant was packed tonight, filled with wealthy guests dressed in fine suits and elegant gowns. The sound of chatter and clinking glasses filled the air, along with the soft notes of the grand piano in the corner. She glanced at the pianist, a middle-aged man who played every night. His fingers moved smoothly across the keys, though his expression looked tired, like he had played the same songs 1,000 times. Emily sighed and continued working. She had been a waitress here for over a year, but no one really noticed her. To the guests, she was just another server, someone who brought their food and refilled their glasses. But Emily had a secret. She had loved music since she was a child. Her mother had worked 2 jobs to pay for her piano lessons, but when money ran out, the lessons had to stop. Since then, Emily had practiced whenever she could, on an old keyboard at home, in an empty church when no one was around, even tapping melodies on the edge of the counter during slow shifts. But in this grand restaurant, with its golden chandeliers and velvet curtains, no one would ever guess that the quiet waitress could play. "Table 5 is waiting for their order," her manager, Mr. Clark, said sharply, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Yes, sir," Emily replied quickly, rushing to the kitchen. The night continued as usual, serving dishes, clearing plates, smiling politely. But then something unexpected happened. The pianist suddenly stopped playing. At first, no one noticed, but then a few guests turned their heads. The manager frowned and walked toward the stage. The pianist was rubbing his wrist, his face tight with pain. "I can't play," the man said. "My hand is cramping up. I need a break." Mr. Clark looked frustrated. "We can't have silence in here. The music is part of the experience." He turned, searching the room. "Is there anyone who can play?" The waiters exchanged glances, but no one stepped forward. Emily's heart pounded. This was her chance. She hesitated, then slowly raised her hand. "I can play," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager's eyes narrowed. "You?" He let out a short laugh. "We don't have time for games, Emily." "I'm serious," she said, straightening her back. "I know how to play." Mr. Clark looked doubtful, but with no other options, he sighed. "Fine. But if you embarrass us, you're back to serving tables immediately." Emily nodded, wiping her hands on her apron before walking toward the grand piano. The room felt heavier with every step she took. Could she really do this? There was only one way to find out. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. Emily's fingers hovered over the piano keys. The moment felt surreal. She had always dreamed of playing for an audience, but never imagined it would happen here, in this grand restaurant. Her hands shook, but she quickly took a deep breath and began to play. Her fingers found the familiar notes, and the soft melody filled the air. The sound of the piano echoed through the large room, quickly drawing the attention of the guests. At first, it was only a few people who turned to look, confused by the sudden music. But as Emily continued playing, the room grew quieter. Conversations slowed down, and soon all eyes were on her. Her heart raced, but she couldn't stop. The music flowed through her, calming her nerves. It was as if the piano had become her voice, and for the first time, she felt truly heard. As she played, Emily could see the wealthy patrons at their tables, their faces filled with surprise. Some of them looked at each other in disbelief, while others simply stared at her with wide eyes. She could feel the energy shift in the room, the once busy space now completely focused on her. A few moments passed before she realized something. She had done it. She had stopped time. The usual noise of the restaurant, the clattering of plates, the hushed murmurs of conversation, had all disappeared. There was only the music and the audience. As Emily played, she felt more confident. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving with grace and ease. It was as if the music was telling a story, one she had never shared before. Every note she played was like a small piece of herself, released into the world. At a nearby table, an elderly man, who had been listening intently, leaned over to his companion. Emily noticed him and couldn't help but feel a little nervous. The man was known to be a lover of classical music, and he had an air of sophistication about him. He was nodding, clearly impressed with what he was hearing. Emily's confidence grew even more. She couldn't stop now. The music had taken on a life of its own, and she was determined to finish what she had started. As she neared the end of the song, she could see some of the guests exchanging smiles, their faces lit up with joy. It wasn't just the beauty of the music. It was the surprise of seeing someone like her, a simple waitress, playing so beautifully. Emily had always kept her talent hidden, never daring to show it to anyone. But now, it seemed like the whole room was witnessing her moment of courage. She finished the piece with a final, sweet note, letting the sound hang in the air for a few seconds before lifting her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was almost deafening. And then the applause began. The room was silent for a moment, and then it happened. Applause erupted from every corner. The sound of clapping hands filled the air, echoing around the grand restaurant. Emily froze. Her heart raced. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected any of this. She blinked and looked around, still seated at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The guests were standing now, some with wide smiles, others with their hands raised in applause. Their reactions were full of surprise and admiration. Emily's hands felt cold as she slowly stood up, unsure of what to do next. For a few seconds, she didn't move. She was trying to process what had just happened. She had only been playing for a few minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The music she loved so much had touched something inside the guests, something she hadn't expected. Then she heard a voice. Well, that was unexpected. It was Mr. Clark, the manager, standing near the piano with a look of disbelief on his face. Emily smiled nervously. She had expected him to be angry. After all, she had interrupted his carefully planned night. But instead, he looked impressed. That was incredible, he said, his tone softer than usual. I didn't know you could play like that. I didn't mean to. I just thought it was a chance to try, Emily said, still a bit shaken. Well, you've certainly impressed everyone here, Mr. Clark replied. I think you've made your mark. As he turned to walk away, Emily heard the elderly man from earlier say something to his companion. This is a rare talent. I can't believe she's just a waitress here. Her face turned red with embarrassment. She had never wanted attention like this. She had only wanted to play, to let her music speak for her. But now, the room was full of people looking at her, and she wasn't sure how to feel. As the applause died down, a few guests returned to their conversations, but many stayed, still talking about her performance. Emily sat back down at the piano, unsure whether to play another song or to leave. Suddenly, the elderly man who had been listening closely earlier stood up and made his way toward her. He was tall and dignified, his gray hair combed neatly. Emily was a little nervous, unsure of what to expect. "Excuse me, miss," the man said, his voice calm but full of authority. "That was a beautiful performance. I don't think I've heard someone play like that in years. Tell me, where did you learn?" Emily's eyes widened. I didn't really go to school for it," she said, her voice soft. "I just practiced by myself. I used to have lessons when I was younger, but—" She trailed off, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I see," the man said, nodding slowly. "Well, it's clear you have a natural gift. I would be honored to help you develop it. My name is Mr. Harrison, and I'm a composer. Perhaps we could discuss a few opportunities for you." Emily couldn't believe her ears. A composer, offering to help her. This was beyond anything she had imagined. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, feeling overwhelmed. "You don't need to say anything," Mr. Harrison replied with a warm smile. "You've already shown more than enough. Just consider it." With that, he turned and walked back to his table, leaving Emily standing there. staring after him in disbelief. Emily's hand shook as she tried to steady herself. The room had fallen quiet again, but this time it was different. It was like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something. She could still feel the warmth of the spotlight on her, even though it wasn't a real spotlight. It was just the attention she had never expected. Her heart was racing. She had just played for these people, and they had responded with applause, surprise, and admiration. She had done something she had dreamed of for so long, but now that it was over, she wasn't sure what to do next. The elderly man, Mr. Harrison, had offered her something she never thought possible, a chance to pursue her music. But was she ready for it? Could she really leave behind a life she knew, the safety of being just a waitress in this quiet corner of the world? As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she noticed the faces of the guests. Some were still staring at her, their eyes wide with amazement. Others were whispering to one another, no doubt discussing the unexpected performance. She felt like the eyes of the entire room were on her. The atmosphere had shifted, and it wasn't just about food and drink anymore. It was about something more, something bigger than her. It was as if her music had opened a door, and now everyone wanted to know who she was, what she could do, and where she had come from. Suddenly, a voice broke through her thoughts. That was incredible. Emily turned her head to see a woman standing nearby, a glass of wine in her hand. The woman was dressed in a sleek black dress, her long hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. She looked like someone who belonged in the movies, someone who had it all. "Thank you," Emily replied, her voice soft. "I've never heard anything like it," the woman said, her eyes sparkling. "You're wasted on waiting tables." Emily didn't know what to say. She had always felt out of place among the wealthy guests who dined here. And now here was this woman, telling her she had something special. The woman smiled. "You must have been hiding that talent for a long time. I think it's time you show the world what you can really do." Her words made Emily feel both excited and terrified at the same time. Could she really take that leap? Could she risk everything she knew for the chance to follow her dream? Before Emily could respond, the man at the table closest to her, Mr. Harrison, stood up again. He walked toward her with a calm, purposeful stride. "You have something rare," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's not just about playing the piano. It's about the emotion you put into it. That's what people connect with. That's what makes you special." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never thought of herself as special. She had always been just a girl with a hidden talent, a waitress who served food and smiled politely. But tonight, everything felt different. Tonight, she felt like she had a purpose. "I'd like to help you," Mr. Harrison continued, his voice kind but insistent. "There's a lot more you could do with this talent, if you're willing to take the chance." Emily was speechless. She had never imagined that one night, one performance, could change everything. She had always kept her talent a secret, afraid of what might happen if she ever shared it. But now, in this moment, everything felt possible. Emily sat in stunned silence as Mr. Harrison's words hung in the air. "I'd like to help you." The words echoed in her mind, repeating over and over like a song she couldn't forget. She had always dreamed of someone noticing her, of someone believing in her talent. But now, here it was, an offer from a real composer. The applause from the guests had died down, but Emily could still hear the lingering echo in her ears. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She was just a waitress, after all. Just a quiet woman with a love for music, hiding behind the scenes. But now, everything had changed. The sound of clapping hands returned, louder this time. It came from the corner of the room where the elderly man had been sitting. And soon, other guests joined in. Emily blinked, feeling like she was in a dream. She hadn't expected anyone to react like this. It was overwhelming. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but at the same time, she couldn't help but feel a warmth in her chest. The applause felt like a reward for all the years of practicing in secret, the years of believing she wasn't good enough to share her music with the world. And then someone called out from the back of the room, "Encore! Encore!" A few other voices joined in, and before Emily knew it, people were standing up, clapping, and chanting for more. She hadn't even thought about playing another song. She hadn't planned on performing for this long. But the crowd's energy was infectious, and for the first time in her life, Emily felt the pull to give them more. She stood up, her legs shaky, and looked around the room. The guests were all watching her, their eyes full of admiration and curiosity. She could feel their expectation, their desire to hear more. The piano keys seemed to call to her. With a deep breath, she sat back down, her fingers finding their place on the smooth surface of the keys. This time, she didn't hesitate. She didn't second-guess herself. She just played. The melody that flowed from her fingers was a different one, a little softer, but just as beautiful. It was a piece she had written herself, one she had composed during quiet nights when she needed an escape from the world. The song had always been hers, a secret she had never shared with anyone. But now it felt right. Now it felt like the world was ready to hear it. As she played, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. The music was no longer just something she did for herself. It was for them, for the people who were listening. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a musician, a person who could bring something beautiful into the world. The room was still, except for the sound of her piano. It was like everyone was holding their breath, listening closely to every note. Emily felt her heart beating in time with the music, steady and strong. She was no longer nervous. She was free. When the last note finally echoed out, there was silence once again. This time, it wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar of applause, thunderous and powerful. People were standing, cheering, and even wiping away tears. Emily looked around in disbelief. She couldn't believe this was happening. Mr. Harrison, who had been watching from a distance, smiled at her and nodded approvingly. "Well done," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You've got something truly special." Emily's heart swelled with pride. It was more than she had ever imagined. It was a night she would never forget. The applause finally faded, but Emily sat at the piano, her fingers still resting on the keys. The room was buzzing with excitement, guests talking about her performance, some still in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Emily's heart was pounding in her chest, but she felt something she had never felt before, a sense of belonging. She had never imagined that a simple piano performance could change her life. She had always kept her dreams hidden, afraid that they were too big for someone like her. But tonight, everything was different. As the room slowly quieted, Emily stood up and turned to face the crowd. Her legs were shaky, but her smile was genuine. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud of herself. Then she saw him. Mr. Harrison, the elderly man who had been so impressed by her playing, was making his way toward her. His steps were slow but purposeful, and Emily could see the spark of admiration in his eyes. "You have incredible talent," Mr. Harrison said as he reached her. His voice was warm and steady, full of respect. "I've been listening to music for many years, and I can tell when someone has something special. And you, my dear, have something truly special." Emily felt her cheeks flush at his words, but she couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. She had always dreamed of hearing someone say those words to her, but now it was happening. "I don't know what to say," Emily replied, her voice soft with disbelief. "I'm just a waitress. I didn't expect any of this." Mr. Harrison chuckled. "You're much more than a waitress, and you don't have to say anything. Your music speaks for itself." He paused for a moment, as if thinking carefully about his next words. Then he continued, "I'd like to help you. I've spent my life composing, and I've worked with many talented musicians. I believe you could go very far with the right guidance." Emily blinked, stunned. "You want to help me?" "Yes," Mr. Harrison said, nodding. "I can offer you a chance to study with me, to work on your music. You have a natural gift that deserves to be nurtured. I believe you could make something amazing out of it." Emily felt her heart race. This was the opportunity she had always dreamed of, but it seemed too good to be true. She was just a simple waitress. Could she really leave her old life behind and chase this dream? Before she could answer, Mr. Harrison spoke again. "Think about it. I won't pressure you, but I can tell you that this is a rare chance. Not many people get to work with someone like me." Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had always dreamed of becoming a professional musician, but she had never thought it was possible. She had always been told that dreams like hers were out of reach. But now, someone was offering her that very chance. As she stood there, lost in thought, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. She could hear the soft murmur of voices around her, but it felt distant, like it was all happening to someone else. "I'll think about it," Emily said quietly, her voice full of determination. "But I want to try. I want to see where this could go." Mr. Harrison smiled, clearly pleased with her response. "Good. That's all I ask." As he turned to walk away, Emily watched him, a feeling of excitement bubbling inside her. Her life was about to change. The next few days passed in a blur for Emily. She couldn't stop thinking about the night at the restaurant, the applause, and most of all, Mr. Harrison's offer. It felt like a dream, something so far beyond her reach. She had always been the quiet, reserved waitress, just trying to get by. But now she was being asked to step into a world she had never imagined. She had always dreamed of being a musician, but doubts crept in. Was she really good enough? Was it too late for someone like her to pursue a career in music? She wasn't even formally trained, just a girl who had spent years playing by herself in the quiet moments of her life. Her mind swirled with questions. Could she leave her safe, steady job behind? What if she failed? What if she wasn't as good as Mr. Harrison thought? It felt overwhelming. She wasn't used to taking risks, and this felt like the biggest one of all. Emily walked through the familiar halls of the restaurant, her apron on as she went through the motions of her shift. But her mind was elsewhere. She could hear the music in her head, the notes she had played on the piano, the way the guests had reacted. It was like the melody was following her, reminding her of what could be. During her lunch break, Emily sat in the small staff room, staring at her phone. She had been replaying Mr. Harrison's offer over and over in her mind. She had told him she would think about it, but now it felt like there was no clear answer. The fear of failure was strong, and the idea of leaving everything she knew behind was terrifying. Her best friend, Lily, walked in, interrupting her thoughts. "Hey, you okay?" Lily asked, sitting down across from her. Emily sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I don't know. It's just, everything feels so big right now. Mr. Harrison wants to help me. He's offering me a chance to do something I've always wanted to do. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I can't do it?" Lily looked at her with kind eyes. "Emily, you're better than you think. You've got something special. I've seen it. We all have. This is your chance. You can't let fear stop you from going for what you really want." Emily bit her lip, thinking. She trusted Lily. She had been there for her through every up and down. But still, the fear lingered. It wasn't just about playing the piano. It was about stepping into a new life, one full of unknowns. "Yeah, but it's a huge change. I don't know if I'm ready to give up everything for a dream." "You won't be giving up everything," Lily said, her voice steady. "You're not walking away from your life. You're walking toward something better. You don't have to do it all at once. Take it one step at a time. You deserve this, Emily." Emily stared at her friend, the words sinking in. Maybe she was right. Maybe she had been too afraid of failing to see the possibilities. She couldn't live her life always wondering what could have been. With a deep breath, Emily stood up. "You're right. I have to at least try." Lily smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "I knew you'd get there. You're going to do great." Emily's heart started to race again, but this time, it wasn't out of fear, it was excitement. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she was ready to find out. The decision was made. Emily couldn't keep doubting herself anymore. She had spent so much time hiding her talent, afraid of what others might think. And now she was ready to take the chance. It wasn't going to be easy, but if she didn't try, she would always wonder, what if? The next evening, Emily walked into the restaurant with a different feeling. The usual nervousness she felt before starting her shift was gone. Instead, she felt a sense of purpose, like she was about to do something important. She had already made up her mind. She was going to pursue her music, and nothing was going to hold her back. She went straight to Mr. Clark, the manager, who was busy organizing the night's schedule. "Mr. Clark," Emily said, her voice firm but kind. He looked up, surprised to see her so confident. "Yes, Emily? What can I do for you?" "I won't be waiting tables anymore," Emily said, her hands shaking slightly but her voice steady. "I'm going to play the piano here regularly. I've made up my mind." Mr. Clark stared at her for a moment, his brow furrowed. "What? You want to play piano? Are you serious?" Emily nodded. "Yes, I'm serious. I've decided to follow my dream. I'm going to give it everything I've got." For a few seconds, there was silence. Emily could feel her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what Mr. Clark would say, but she had to do this. Finally, Mr. Clark sighed. "Well, you've got guts. I'll give you that. If you're really serious about this, I guess we can work something out. But you're going to have to prove yourself. You'll be performing in front of guests regularly, not just during slow hours. Do you understand that?" Emily smiled, a little relieved. "Yes, I understand. I'm ready for whatever it takes." "All right then," Mr. Clark said with a nod. "You start tomorrow. Let's see what you've got." Emily's excitement soared. She had done it. She had taken the first step toward her dream. And now there was no turning back. Later that night, after her shift had ended, Emily went to the piano. The restaurant was quiet now. The last guests had left, and she had a few moments of peace to herself. She sat down at the grand piano, her fingers gently brushing across the keys. The music flowed easily, as it always did when she played alone. She played the same piece she had played the night she had first stepped up to the piano. The familiar melody soothed her nerves, and she felt a sense of calm wash over her. This was where she belonged, in this moment of music. The sound of her piano echoed softly through the empty restaurant. It was like the world outside didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the music and the new path she had chosen. She thought of Mr. Harrison's words, of the possibility he had offered her. She thought of the life she had left behind, and the life that lay ahead. The unknown future didn't scare her anymore. Emily had taken her leap of faith. She had chosen to follow her heart, and no matter what happened next, she was ready for the journey. Emily woke up early the next morning, the sun just starting to peek through the curtains. She felt a flutter of excitement in her chest, a feeling she hadn't had in years. Today wasn't just another day. Today was the first day of her new life. As she got dressed, she couldn't help but smile. She wasn't just putting on her uniform to serve food. She was putting on something more. She was putting on the confidence to walk into that restaurant and show the world, well, at least the guests, who she really was. When she arrived at the restaurant, the usual busy atmosphere was already in full swing. Servers rushed around, setting tables and taking orders, while the soft sounds of background music filled the air. But today, Emily didn't feel like just another face in the crowd. Today, she was different. She made her way to the manager's office and knocked lightly on the door. "Come in," Mr. Clark called from inside. Emily stepped in, and he looked up, surprised to see her so early. "I'm ready," she said simply. "Ready for what?" Mr. Clark asked, confused. "To play," Emily answered with a smile. "I'm ready to take my place at the piano." Mr. Clark blinked for a moment, then nodded. "Well, it's all set up. Go on, then. Show us what you've got." Emily walked to the grand piano at the center of the restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. She wasn't going to hide anymore. The guests were beginning to filter in, chatting as they settled at their tables. But she could feel all eyes turning toward her as she sat down. The moment her fingers touched the keys, everything else faded away. She closed her eyes and began to play. It was a new piece she had been working on, one that felt like it spoke directly to her heart. As the music filled the space, she felt like she was pouring all her hopes, dreams, and fears into every note. She played with confidence, no longer worried about what others might think. This was her moment. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a musician, sharing her soul through the piano. As the last note echoed through the restaurant, there was a brief silence. Then the guests began clapping, some standing up, some nodding in approval. Emily opened her eyes, and a wave of warmth washed over her. The applause wasn't just for the music. It was for her, the woman who had the courage to take the leap and pursue her dreams. Mr. Clark appeared at the edge of the stage, smiling. "You did great, Emily," he said, his voice full of pride. "I think you found your place here." Emily smiled back, feeling a mix of relief and joy. She had done it. From that day on, Emily played the piano every night, her performances becoming a highlight for the guests. She continued to work with Mr. Harrison, learning more about music and improving her skills. Slowly but surely, she was building the life she had always dreamed of. Her journey was just beginning, and while the path ahead was uncertain, Emily knew one thing for sure. She had found her true calling, and she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way.